Hello, everyone. Nate Smith here with the AE team, going over the latest results for the closeout of the 2024 season. Looking forward to discuss the last of the results that are now in hand, as well as some of the preliminary workup on what the next steps will be, and then discuss just maybe some of the upcoming events that we can see you guys at here, or engage with you here some more. So nice to see you, Neil. Nice to see you, Charlie. Hey, guys.
Hey,
Hey, Nate.
Yeah, so I've got on my screen here. I'll do the request to share here and throw up my screen. Just let me know when you guys can see it. Right on. Okay, is that up there for you guys now?
Yep.
yeah,
Nice. Okay, yeah, so I've got the news release here, and then I got some notes and some questions, so I'll just run you guys through if that's all right. So first things first, 31 was detailed. So 31 is a hole. I'm going to bounce around a little bit here just to identify. So 31 is a hole in the southwest quadrant of what's been drilled to date here. It's a bit of a step out to hole 17. I was noting in the result set here specifically, the bulk of the unit had hit on that high grade conglomerate arrangement, as well as some of the mafic diking, and was terminated a little bit shorter than some of our other holes, but this was more in line with the depths you guys had drilled off as what I was calling the inner zipper. I think what jumped out at me was the overall gold grade compared to 2317 was seen as a bit of a step up. So I guess lower moly, higher grade gold, and then similar in copper. So it's nice to see that. So how does this fit overall into the approach to next year's program? Are you guys looking to see if you can have like a single dedicated rig on this to determine the geometry, see if it trends either south, southwest, or southeast? Especially given that we have the results of 2205, looking like it potentially bookends to the deeper south. Yeah, so maybe if you want to open it up and we'll discuss that for a minute here.
I
yeah. I
guess,
mean,
maybe I'll start off with just a real, quick note.
yeah. Go ahead.
But the overall is that, you can link the South Zone to that really good mineralization in 17. And one of the things we'd probably like to do at one stage, I don't think we would necessarily put a rig on there for a full season, but might be to drill north to south or south to north across that system, maybe a little bit further east from 31 and 17, but also maybe further west if it's a sort of roughly east-west or east or a west-southwest trending zone between the South Zone and what we hit in 17 and 31. So we'd like to, maybe understand that a little bit better by drilling, across that trend to get a better handle on exactly what that is and how it links up. But really like the fact that you've got near surface mineralization that ties into the South Zone, which is, essentially a starter pit kind of an arrangement and makes it look a lot bigger, good grade, and shows continuity. So an excellent hole. Love it.
Yeah, no, I'll just also say like it really good to see the mineralization in 31 come closer to surface, right? The bulk of the continuous, really nice, consistent high grade is at about 130 meters. Um, there's still quite a bit of room to do another fence hole to the east. Before we get to the really high gold grade south zone, and then there's also a bunch more room to the south. And looking at how our geological model is developing, I mean, it looks like the conglomerate that's hosting the best grade likely daylights its surface before hole 15 was drilled. Um, there's been very little historical drilling in there oriented the other way. Uh, and so there's a really good potential, as Charlie said, for this mineralized zone to actually daylight its surface uh, outside the already known extent of the good surface mineralization further to the east. So yeah, there's a lot of potential in there to develop this much higher grade starter pit, as Charlie said. So yeah, that was a really really positive development, I think, in this zone, and just happy that systematic drilling, just stepping in, filling along that western trend has revealed that. So yeah, really good to see.
Yeah, those are some interesting remarks to say that they have the potential to look not just south, but possibly not. And sorry, not just east, but also possibly somewhat west. Could you guys comment on what is potentially west in this area or southwest of this area drilled to date that is presenting that attractiveness that's not shown here, representative on the drilling map overview?
One thing that struck out to me, just really quickly, sorry, Neil, is
Yeah.
just that there's kind of a west southwest mag trend, and I mean where we have elevated mag, it's often good. So I'm just thinking I haven't looked at it recently, but it always kind of puzzled me, why that mag trend was there, and testing that, and I don't think we've drilled to far enough west to really evaluate that. And I think drilling across it, south to north or north to south, because we see sort of the same things in 17 and 31, and then it links up to the south zone farther to the east. If we're drilling across it north to south, then we'll have a better handle on what that exactly is, and does that kind of correlate with that east-west mag trend. I don't have a figure handy here, but it always kind of puzzled me why that was there, and it seems to correspond with where we're hitting good stuff. So something we want to check out.
No, that's great feedback. Yeah, I've been, I'm with you in the alignment of seeing like that. Yes, there's going to be this initial starter zone here, so it's going to be interesting to see where it can grow further still to say, okay, well, yeah, it has an envelope that's actually a little bit bigger than we expected. So that's great. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So on to hole 35, which was the exciting development there after you guys had hit in 33 and with the efforts that you did to shoot it north. I can appreciate you had some comments around limited access at the time near the end of the season. So yeah, with 35 taking its way northeast, we see that yeah, we've hit some of the conglomerate package at the top, initial foray into the beanstalk, but then hitting that new. Oh, sorry, there's also a discrete interval of that new intrusive arrangement, but then hitting that intrusive arrangement that stretches almost, what is that, 200 meters down, almost 300. So yeah, let's talk about that for a second. So it's great to see the overall consistency of the mineralization made up primarily of copper, but there's also some level of gold in the background there, which is indicative of fertility in my books. The fact that we're also seeing that gold level there, despite no major or minor veining set as well, right? So most of the mineralization, my understanding from the description is that it's pervasive and disseminated only. So in a traditional porphyry arrangement, we're no longer, I said we're not actually, sorry, no longer, but we're not into yet an area which would be considered higher grade or typically associated with higher grade with the veining, right? So that's an interesting result to date on that. Can you comment on the quartz vein density recording though? We haven't seen that as reported to date. I'm assuming you guys have it recorded and you're using it in the context of, like, say, for example, the anaconda method, whereby you're using vein density to then incorporate into your localization of the high grade zone. Is that something you guys have begun or have captured in this point? And is it something we can see reported in the future?
Yeah, I mean, throughout our logging, because veining at NAC so far is a relatively small component of the mineralization throughout a lot of zones. We're actually recording every instance of a sulfide mineralized vein and quartz veins as we see them. So we can plot not just an estimate of vein density, but we can plot real-time vein density as it's recorded. I mean, with a bit of variation, how depending on how much detail the loggers go into and core load. But generally, we're pretty diligent with taking a point structure measurement on every vein, recording thickness, recording sulfide species, and recording its location. That said, throughout the serrate texture intrusive, there is very, very low vein density. What there appear to be, and it almost looks like there's these proto stringers we're returning them. There's zones where it looks like the sulfides are aligning along a fabric, but it's not a continuous fabric. So it's not quite developed to the point of like a brittle fracture and then veining coming through. This appears to be developing with that melt. So it's quite unique in terms of how it is mineralized. And yeah, the relatively low abundance of veining, it's almost entirely disseminated sulfides throughout the zone.
Yeah, I call those things seams. They're,
Mm-hmm.
they're very thin. They might be a number of centimeters long, but they are, they end. And they almost look a little bit stylolytic, not really like stylolites. I mean, I know that's kind of a technical term, but it's these seams of minerals that aren't dissolved that form in carbonates. So obviously these aren't carbonates, but they sort of look like that. And as Neil said, they are sort of aligned, and they occur, one every centimeter or two, and sometimes you see them, sometimes you don't. They're quite unusual, but the NAC system is quite unusual. And a comment on what Neil said about veining. At one point in time, I think I gave a talk and said, well, NAC really isn't about veining like a typical porphyry. In the South Zone, yes, we do have quartz veining that carries a bit of bornite. It's kind of underwhelming looking in terms of its density, but it's very important to defining that South Zone. But elsewhere, we don't see very much quartz veining. The veining we see really is pretty sulfide rich. They're spectacular. You look at the website that American Eagle has, and there's all these photos of veins. And I've had some pretty experienced geos tell me, I love the photos that you have of veins. They're spectacular. All these textures, they're fairly thick, they're fairly sulfide rich, bornite with chalcocite. They're beautiful, basically. Yeah, they're not, volumetrically, they're not a huge number of them, as Neil said. We mostly can measure every vein we see, and the core loggers are busy, but they're not measuring like hundreds over meters. They're just, here's one, and it kind of goes down the core, or it goes right across the core, and they're easy to pick off. And I think when you look at this, if you zoomed in on this image that you have up, Nate, sort of, 2/3 of the way down, that lower interval, 324 at 0.45, look at the lower part of that interval. And zoom in even farther, sort of corresponding to where the green lithology is, the darker green, in that stretch, the greater part of it. One thing that's really striking to me there is it doesn't have the same spikiness that much of NAC has, say in the Babine porphyry, the pink part of it. That has, it's very spiky, and overall it definitely delivers grade, but people don't like the spikiness, or some people don't. But these intrusions that have this less veining, and have these disseminations of bornite and chalcopyrite, and to some degree chalcocite, they deliver a very uniform grade. And that is kind of nice when it comes to, what, when you're getting that lithology, what grade you're getting, and you're not getting it is spiky, but it still delivers some pretty darn nice grades. So that's one of the exciting things to me about this new stuff we've intersected in the north, such as in hole 35, is pretty big, kind of many tens of meters of pretty uniform grade, this disseminated style stuff. And it doesn't have very many veins. It has some of these seams, and elsewhere just the disseminated bornite that looks like it's replacing mafic minerals in the original host rock. So something, quite different, but definitely pretty exciting and nice for, mining and milling, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. That's some great detail you've gone into there, Charlie. You touched on pardon me, the consistency of the CU grade, right? Seeing that, instead of spikiness, we have one big consistency. I think is very interesting. With the arrangement that we have here too, I mean, if we go to a traditional porphyry model, you typically see pervasive disseminations distal to, as we then develop into the quartz veining system of it too. So there's nothing with this being the new intrusive development, right? Like there's nothing to say that as you guys start to zone into the higher grade zones that they don't see that quartz level, or sorry, the quartz veining or veining in general start to pick up. It'll be interesting to see how you guys zone into that. But what I thought was also very curious was given the level of the mineralization grade compared to like say some of the other neighboring projects, right? When you see pervasive or just disseminated without any veining, the grades are not nearly as reflective. So maybe you guys can comment on that, on where and how or what we're thinking is contributing to the overall grade level compared to like some of our neighbors here, versus their encountered levels of pervasive and disseminated mineralization.
Yeah, I mean, at the Bell and Granile mines, there were zones of intrusive rock, this BFP, which is the, you know, the regional term, biotite feldspar porphyry. That was the main host, and it had some stockwork mineralization developed in it, but there was quite a bit of disseminated bornite and chalcopyrite, and that was what defined a large part of the ore body at Bell and Granile. We don't see, like, going by the historical descriptions and the detailed reports of the from the Bell and Granile mines, and actually talking to Peter O'Grislow, who stopped by site this summer and took a look at the core and a look at some of the other holes that we drilled. What we had on the table there and what we had drilled to date there looked quite different than what was being encountered at Bell and Granile. So even though the ages of the system are similar, NAC is quite a bit larger in terms of footprint. And different. There's different mineralization styles reflected at NAC. That said, this newly encountered, you know, serrate texture zone, I would be really curious to have Peter come back. And he lives in the area, and we have a dialogue going back and forth. So it would be really good to get him out to site and just take a look and see. I mean, maybe this is quite similar to what they were finding at Bell and Granile, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Those were mined back when prices for all the relevant commodities were much lower than they are now. So yeah, I don't see that as a bad thing at all. It's just another layer of complexity that we have at NAT. We've got a variety of mineralization styles that have a different association of copper and gold to them. Another interesting thing about what you have up in this section here is that lower, more consistent zone, a little bit lower grade in copper down deep, about 0.21% copper, but then the gold is quite a bit higher. So the gold is 0.13 grams per ton gold over that whole lower interval, from about 450 down to just about 700. So it's really interesting to see the gold grade increase with depth, and the gold grade be quite a bit higher than what historically been found in the near surface north zone. So it's pretty indicative that we've got something somewhat novel for even for NAC, and having it open and the geometry right now pretty poorly defined, as we only have two intercepts through it. Yeah, I think it really bodes well for future exploration in the north.
That's great context and more feedback on that. The gold
Yeah.
grade is very surprising to me, given the again the lack of veining, right? So to see that in this currently pervasive and disseminated arrangement has my attention, because it's like, well, like we do end up wandering to something with a higher level of vein density. Do we see that mobility of the gold then reconcentrating it possibly? So again, very speculative, but what I would be looking for an overall intrusive arrangement for this. So yeah. Okay, well, let's talk about what we know about this. I mean, we have very limited in the way of holes on it so far, but what are the limits right now for, say, this coming up to surface, right? I mean, we do have a layer of till, but is there anything stopping this from daylighting right underneath that till?
Well, a lot of what we've defined so far in the various intrusive phases at NAC and the various dike phases, there is a prominent north-south-ish trending, very steeply dipping arrangement of a bunch of these different dikes. That said, the geochemistry of this intrusive suite, the one we're reporting on here, this serrate texture intrusive, is quite a bit different than the dikes that we are inferring to be associated with the Babine porphyry stock itself, and then these later stage monzonite diking phases that also host copper. So this is unique to our previously defined copper dikes, and it's unique within the Babine porphyry stock. And right now, grouping the different geochemical zones, this doesn't conform to that same trend. Uh, it it's at least, it doesn't, we don't encounter it to the south. And with the arrangements of the holes, if this was a steeply dipping planar curviplanar body, like a lot of our more narrow copper bearing dikes, we would expect to see it in those holes further to the south. So it's, it's either being truncated, it's either coming up from a deeper source, potentially like little knife-like structures, or they're more globular plutonic bodies, and we're just hitting the fringes of them here. So there's a geometrical constraints that aren't well understood at this stage, with only two holes really properly intersecting this. So it's just going to take more systematic drilling. But yeah, there's a very distinct potential. These come close to surface. There's almost no historical drilling done up to the northeast. There's some very sparsely spaced holes, and then some very, very shallow Noranda holes that were vertical, that were drilled in the 70s. And none of those went deeper than 100 meters. So there's very, very little drilling up there, and it's completely open. So it's yeah, I don't want to rule anything out, but we're not at the stage where we can conclusively say, yeah, this does come to surface. But it's certainly a possibility.
Yeah, and I guess the flip side of it would be also, if it's not constrained to come to surface, I mean, with the current arrangement of it, are we expecting to see it go to depth? And it sounds like, yeah, the potential is definitely there. Combined with the results of, 33, 35, 37, 38, I guess next year, the first things first is to try and get a handle on the geometry of what is interpreted to be. I'm looking at what I think is possibly two for sure expressions of this new intrusive, or have you guys identified or localized it to more than that?
There's certainly
I'd like to jump in with a
yeah,
comment
go ahead.
first, actually. Um, Sorry, Neil. I mean, the geos that did all the logging are outside the door, and outside my door here in Penticton, and working away on level plans, etc. And yeah, well, they're not north-south trends. They are kind of northwest and north-northwest. And the way they're kind of modeling them up right now. And again, it's preliminary because we only have a couple of sections, but they are kind of still modeling them as dike-like features. They're thicker than some of the other dikes that we have, with these so-called copper dikes, the monzonite things. They are K-rich too. You just can look at the fundamental chemistry of them, and they're very potassium rich, like the monzonites are. So they also both of those phases cut the Babine porphyry. So we know they're part of a younger sort of suite. So there's some things that we do know of them, and they do, like I said, northwest trending, kind of intersect this northerly trend that we see with some of those other narrower monzonites that carry a lot of copper as well. So, there's a bunch of things that we know. We put some preliminary orientations on them: northwest trending, maybe north steep, moderately to steeply northeast dipping, and then we test those kind of hypotheses. But there's some stuff coming together, and I do think we see them at a variety of levels. So uh, I don't see any issue with them coming to surface. I think they will, and I'm willing to stand on that one. It's just a matter of drilling, some shallower holes. The same thing with those copper bearing dikes. If we finish off our drilling just south of the north zone, and we choke up and come a little bit closer to the contact of the Babine porphyry and drill some shallower holes, we're going to get some nice near surface intercepts, I'm certain. There you go.
Yeah,
Put your money
thanks
where
for
your mouth is.
thanks for putting that color to it there, Charlie.
Yeah.
I think the other thing you're identifying though, and what we're getting at, is that overall the potential for the North Zone to hold another, either a starter pit or an intermediate pit to be kicked off sooner than later is what I'm seeing starting to show up. Especially, I mean, let's switch over to hole 38, which did a lot of work to push towards the north and fill in some of that conglomerate zone. I mean, we're still seeing consistent zone that's showing up, that's associated with that conglomerate, seeing that enrichment level. Um, yes, we still see some of the lower grades as we hit that Babine porphyry stock, the BFP. there's biotite feldspar porphyry, the Babine main stock. But then seeing again in 38 the encountering of this new intrusive. So I'm seeing more indications that it's like, yep, the story to the north is just starting. And for those of us who are just joining the project, it's a case of, as much as it's been a couple years behind us, it's like, yeah, this is a whole new development. I don't know if you had any specific comments you wanted to make on hole 38. I will note that it was interesting to see the grades relative to 35 secondary intrusive, that Pierce point. I don't know if you want to make any comments on that there, Neil, but yeah, so it's 2 points in on that section of that new intrusive.
Yeah, so geochemically and texturally, it's identical to what we hit in that lower intercept of 35. It's cutting across it at a bit of a different angle, and it's coming in a little bit lower positionally. It's very, very similar copper numbers and actually pretty similar gold numbers, about 0.09 grams per ton gold. And just go to bring up the table there. And a little bit higher in copper, 0.22, as opposed to 0.21. So it's, yeah, and again, it's got that exact same sort of consistency of mineralization throughout it. So that's hitting the same body. It's right there in space. So we have it constrained on over a relatively small area within 35 and 38 along two slightly different orientations. But it still leaves it wide open as to what the true orientation of that intrusive is. But it was, I was very encouraged that we hit it again, almost completely oblique to it. So it shows we weren't drilling down in hole 35, which was nice. That's when you're drilling through an intrusive phase, it's always a possibility. So it was really nice to see that is actually a pretty extensive volume, which is great to see, and that bodes well for continuity, stepping it to the north.
Okay, and then for 37, now hang on, sorry, I think it jumped over here. Yeah, so for 37, drilled, stepping back to the old 5 hole, from the same hole set, shooting almost east. How has that impacted some of the work and discovery set in 33 and then the potential exploration to the east? I mean, we're not seeing at depth some of the similar intrusive bodies. We are seeing them expressed up at surface, to Charlie's point. It's like they are coming up. But I don't know if these are related necessarily to 35 and 38's encounterings, but yeah, overall, how does 37's result impact the future exploration going forward for, say, east, it's like southeast of it?
So 37 hit close to surface, around 100 meters there, around 75 meters we hit it. That the same upper serrate texture intrusive body, and it's mineralized. You can see the grade. It's all consistently above that 0.2 to 0.3 copper equivalent. But interesting, not as strongly mineralized as what we hit a bit further to the north in hole 35. How this hole differs from 33, for example, we hit the Babine porphyry stock much sooner. So there's not as good constraints on the boundary to the porphyry stock as we step further to the north, and so it looks like it's actually kind of bowing out to the west a bit, and we hit the porphyry stock quite a bit sooner, and you see that sort of characteristic spiky grade within the porphyry stock. There's some pretty nice mineralized zones. There's some dikes that cut it that carry some grade, but overall it hit a pretty big package of porphyry stock rock there. What it did tell us is we know that what we hit in 35 and 38 isn't necessarily a planar body that's steeply dipping and cutting north-south. Because if it was, which was an initial, when we drilled 37, we didn't have the information from 38 yet. It was a known possibility, given everything else we've encountered, that maybe this is a planar body that's cutting north-south. Or northeast southwest, northwest southeast, and that's being ruled out by 37. So 37 was really informative there, and it shows that the potential lies to the northeast.
Right. So I guess the question I would have would be, for your exploration work here going forward in the north, would you consider like 37 as a bisect, right? So everything south will be approached differently than the future in the north to follow up on anything that was done in 33, or
Not necessarily. I'm really hesitant to rule out prospectivity because of one underwhelming hole. I mean, if hole 5 was any example, we drilled from the same collar and it was still fairly steeply dipping. We just angled it to the northeast as opposed to vertically dipping. And 35 was a much, much, much stronger hole than hole 5. 33 was a very strong hole, completely outside of the porphyry stock. Um, and then we know we've got some zones within the porphyry stock, like 33 down a little bit deeper, that are also quite strongly mineralized. So just because we've hit a zone that's not necessarily booming grade, I don't want it to detract from our attempts to be systematic with this, right? So I think there is still some more drilling warranted in there. It's certainly systematic drilling to better define this volume. Um, and that can only help us at this point, right? Like if we assume that 37 is kind of a low bar, which it seems to be, um, we only have the potential to increase what we have, right? We get a zone of some nice dense bornite veining, which we know is abundant within the stock. Um, then when you bulk that out over a volume, it can really help out the grades. So yeah, that's definitely, there's still a lot of potential off to the east, even within the stock.
I think if you go back to the map too, a comment I would make is, where does that map come from? We're at a property that is largely till covered. And, the Babine porphyry stock, I don't even like to use the word stock. I just call it Babine porphyry. And yeah, it kind of has an overall sort of a phaneritic look, but when you look at detail at these rocks, they're a crowded porphyry themselves. So they have a very fine-grained potassium feldspar rich matrix to these crowded plagioclase feldspar phenocrysts in general. And, I think it's a composite body of a number of porphyry intrusions of kind of an uncertain geometry. And, there really isn't a lot of outcrop there. So, and very few drill holes. Look at the map there. Well, we don't have the historic ones on, but they are all pretty short and scattered around or focused along the western margin there. So much of the drilling is right along the western margin. And I think it's kind of an open book when you go to the east. Why haven't we focused there? Well, that would have been heli supported. We may not have to be faced with that, it looks like, coming up. But if we have to be, then we can heli some holes in there and test that. But I think it's not, a blank roundish body that has no grade in it necessarily. I think there's going to be some positive surprises in there. It's just not very well understood from a lack of outcrop.
well, that's great feedback on the results to date here in the 37 here, guys. Thanks for that. Well, let's switch gears. Let's not forget about hole 36. Yeah. So, I mean, let's bring it up here for a second. It was, yeah, yeah, very interesting to see. I mean, this was the step further east of hole 28 from the efforts to expand on the high grade gold zone, the golden rich zone, right? I would say, the initial results here, the grade overall, not to get excited about, but what I was remarking on was the fact that it was almost entirely in the sediment package, minus off the dikes, and there's just this consistent, pervasive background level grade on it, which would be very unusual anywhere else. And I think my general remark would be that um, yeah, it's again a testament to the overall significant mineralization level that was introduced to this system here, that it's been able to take what would otherwise be a zero and take it to a level that even has anomalous for background. So, I want to get your guys' thoughts on this. Uh, my mind goes, was it collar too far north relative to say 28 and then even 09 in the past, and out to the east of it, as well as maybe ask, how is this impacting your guys' follow up to this zone in the future? Is it going to be again a priority for the 2025 season? Are we going to see some work done into the embayment zone? If you can comment there.
I mean, yeah, I'll just speak to the mineralization in this hole quickly off the top here.
Yeah.
It's even more consistently mineralized than our deader conglomerates out further to the east. So it's got a very strong background copper grade, and there's actually decent gold within it too. Um, the upper 140 meters in this hole had over zero point 0.1 grams per ton gold. Um, just as really sparse veinlets and just fine sulfide disseminations throughout these coarser sediments. So it's again very, very encouraging to see this really strong, anomalous, pervasive copper mineralization. There's not a ton to go on in this zone from historical work or even surface work because of the till cover and because of the relative paucity of drilling in this area. Um, so I think it's just a matter of, again, more systematic step outs. We have the funding this year to properly test this zone. Like Charlie was saying, a lot of these holes, or at least a few of these holes, are likely going to be heli supported uh, off the start, and then we can justify putting in some trail. Um, but as we get further to the east, there's a really high likelihood that there's going to be some logging before we start drilling, so we can test that quite well. Uh, the the positives of this zone, uh, looking forward, there's some mineralized outcrop quite a bit further to the south. So there's some chalcopyrite and malachite found at surface. There's chalcopyrite found even further to the south there as well. So that's really encouraging. There isn't a ton of outcrop, but where we do see it, we see again anomalous copper. So it just points to this pretty expansive zone down there. And yeah, we just need to test it properly.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, it's good to hear that this is again going to be one of the targets of interest. I mean, it'd be nice to see something to come together here to help more better explain what we saw in '09 going back to the 2022 season, 2023. Yeah, okay, thanks for that feedback on 36. So one of my general takeaways, I've been diving into the textbooks and otherwise, I would say we're looking at this project, especially the stuff in the north, being more along the lines of like a classic quartz poor alkaline style porphyry deposit. Um, with those deposits typically being narrower in arrangement and typically more associated with underlying structures. Can you guys comment on any work that's being done into the off season or into the early season with regards to maybe better understanding those underlying structures to make sure that you have an understanding of tracking those or better aligning for targeting?
Yeah, I mean, drilling to date, we haven't encountered, we haven't encountered consistent zones of like, oh yes, there's a big fault here, for example. There is quite a bit of a magnetic fabric, a big north-south linear structure running along the mid to midwestern margin of the porphyry stock body. And an idea that's been floated that we really like is to run a bit more detailed, high resolution gradient magnetometer survey, and that can really help pull out the surface expression of faulting and other structures, diking, um, and even veining zones. So that's something that we're gonna definitely be doing in the off season, and then that's gonna help in turn inform how we do the finalized plan for the systematic drilling, right? If we don't want to be drilling down a potential magnetic structure if it's going to impact drilling, or if we're not going to be going through the relevant stratigraphy and or dikes. So that's going to help us, I think. And then we've also floated the idea for deeper imaging of doing a bit of ground-based CSAMT work to help image the resistivity, and that can, if there is a structure at depth or a source at depth, and kind of getting wider or narrower, it can help us better define those deeper targets as well if it's associated with the mineralization. So yeah, these are being considered and will almost definitely be undertaken before drilling.
Okay, no, that's great. That actually leads into some of the other questions I had there of switching gears here, looking into next year, right? So I'm
Hmm.
hearing that possibly one, maybe two different geophysics suites to be applied. Would those be applied property wide, or are those going to have to be localized?
These
Um,
would be property.
okay,
At this stage, it makes sense to do for the MT. We'll do a few pilot lines and see if we get a good response. If we get, if it looks like it's going to be amenable to a broader survey, then we'll do that. But the magnetometer survey, that's airborne, and we'll probably fly 50, 75-meter line spacing over the whole property. The nice thing with having a relatively small, I don't want to say small, I want to say focused land package is, a property-wide survey isn't that big an expenditure when you want to
that's
get higher
airborne.
resolution.
Mhm. Okay, and then yeah, what else is on the books here for tree clearing, road building? Has that all been finalized yet, or are you guys still working with the local operators in there to identify what can be done? I know you touched on possibly some clearing here in the south zone. Is there anything else that's on the books that you guys know of?
Uh, that's a work in progress right now. Bit of a bit of a complicated situation with getting lumber tenures transferred over, but from our most recent talks, there is some positive developments there. A little early to say with uh, any real certainty, but it's looking looking pretty positive right now. And then we've indicated that we're open to helping out in any way we can as well, right? So we're pretty supportive of this. There's a lot of logging outfits in the area that are actively looking for lumber tenures. So should this all go ahead, it's looking like there might actually be a bit more of a resurgence in the logging up there in the coming seasons. Not just for our property, but for the whole region. So, and that would be, that would help everybody.
Okay, no, that's good to hear. That's progressing more in a positive direction there for next winter into the next spring.
Yeah, absolutely.
What else for value add there? I mean, of course, your team there is going to be working on the model overhaul here for a presentation at some point, I'm suspecting.
Yeah.
We touched on petrographic studies, any met work to be kicked off. And then what about external consultation or reviews? You guys throwing this out in front of anybody else to take a look at?
Uh, yeah. I mean, we've had a few discussions with some fairly renowned experts who will be coming in and doing reviews. So Alan Wilson is coming back. Alan Wilson has had quite a bit of familiar with the property, um, visiting our courtyard in 2022 in 2023 and 2024. And so he'll be coming back again to look at the latest drilling and it's really nice. We'll have the whole team looking at the rocks and it's a really good learning opportunity for our guys. Um, and then yeah, I don't know. I believe we've finalized an arrangement with Steve Garwin as well. And so he's going to do a third party external review, and we'll see how that goes and if that develops further too. So yeah, we're getting some porphyry experts, a couple different eyes looking at this, just because NAC is so unique within BC. It's really good to get those really experienced guys who've seen a lot of different deposits.
Yeah, and I mean, as Neil said, Alan was here last spring, went through 12, 13, holes 12, 13, and 14 in a lot of detail. Those are kind of up in the north there, so it'll be great to get him to have a look further. And our plan is to work with Alan right the way through on a north-south section. With those northerly holes, it'll encompass the stuff he's already looked at up north, and then walk that down to the south. And then Steve, it'll be his first time. He's based in Australia, but he's an American guy that went to school. Actually, he TA'd me at one time. He's a little bit younger than me, but he TA'd me at UBC. So, we're familiar with him and with his work. He's worked on a lot of the gold-rich porphyries, all over the world in South America and in Southeast Pacific. So he knows these kind of alkalic, and what we think ours is more of a high K calc, a little bit quartz poor in places, but an unusual one. So it'd be great to have those kind of guys that have seen a lot of rocks, a lot of good deposits, and can give us some insights. Be awesome.
Well, that's great to hear too. Okay, well, I'll shut this off here and stop the share. But yeah, I guess we're looking forward to seeing you guys here at Roundup coming up at the AMEBC here over, what is it, next week, starting Monday. I think I'm going to be there to catch you guys on Tuesday. Unfortunately, Neil, I'm going to be missing your presentation. I believe it's on Thursday. Yeah, can you maybe comment on will it be recorded, or what the context of what it will be there, or what are people missing, I guess is what I'm getting at.
From what I understand, the talks will be available for AME members to view for up to 3 months after the conference.
Perfect.
We won't be recording it ourselves, but from what I understand, it will be recorded and available for viewing in some capacity. So yeah, if you miss it, there should be a way to watch it. My talk will be focusing a lot on what we've done on the modeling and the geochemical discrimination. So there's a lot of interesting work that's happened in this off season. That's, I think, somewhat unique within the industry of how we've gone about characterizing these things. And so it'll be hopefully to geologists, an interesting discussion of how we're trying to make the most of the data we have available. You spend a lot of money collecting data, but you could spend a lot more money collecting data. And I think we found a really good medium for using the most from our geochemical suite and having that be available to guide the geologists. So it's really nice to have concrete quantitative data to help guide the more qualitative observations. So yeah, I think the team's done an excellent job of integrating all that, and I'm going to do my best to break it down. It's I've been primarily on the promo side of things here, so it's good to work with the team and work with the guys. But yeah, it's a big team effort on this, and I hope I can do it justice.
All right, on. Yeah, who all from the team can we expect to see at the booths and at the Core Shack? I guess you guys have some on display too. What are you going to have on display?
We will have a selection. We'll have a full box of the mineralized ceriate texture intrusive, and we'll have a full box of some of this monzonitic, similar looking but importantly different copper diking. And then we're also going to have just a selection of various mineralized lithologies from around the property from the 2024 and 2023 drilling. And I think the whole team's going to be there. Is that right, Charlie? Like, I think everyone's coming down.
Yeah, the whole core logging squad. There's 4 or 5 for sure, and yeah, they're gonna be there. And we have a core shack for 2 days. I think it's Monday and Tuesday, and then we'll have some of that core over at our booth, CJ Gregg and Associates, our consultants booth that is they open the whole 4 days. So if you miss it on those first 2 days, you can come by and we'll have that core or a good chunk of it at least available to look at. Yeah, the whole team's getting a reward to come down and present their rocks, tell you all about them. They
Yeah,
looked at
right
them
on.
more than anyone else, so they're good people to talk to.
That's great. Okay, well
Yeah.
let's wrap it up there. Like I said, I look forward to seeing you guys here in the coming week. And yeah, I mean, there's nothing in the way of drilling here for the next couple months, but I'm sure you guys will have some updates here along the way. So looking forward to those. So thanks again, guys, for making the time.
Yeah, thank
Yeah,
you.
thanks a lot, Nathan. Yeah, cheers.